Before we begin tonight, let me ask you something simple. Where are you watching from? Is it your living room? Your bedroom? Maybe somewhere far away across the world? And what time is it for you right now? Midnight? 3 in the morning? Or those quiet hours just before dawn when the world feels like it belongs only to you? Hold on to that stillness, the walls around you, the air in your room, the silence pressing against your window, because what I'm about to ask next is far heavier than it sounds. What if everything you've ever been taught about the limits of science, the borders of our sky, the very definition of reality itself, was a carefully constructed lie? What if the equations on the chalkboards of universities, the propulsion systems roaring across runways, the rockets climbing toward orbit, what if all of that is already obsolete, already outpaced, already discarded as primitive compared to the machines locked away in the desert right now? And what if the government knows it, has known it for decades, and has built an empire of silence to ensure you never ever find out? That's not conspiracy. That's the chilling implication behind Bob Lazar's testimony, a man who claimed, not in whispers but in direct, unflinching detail, that he worked hands-on with craft that were not of this earth. Imagine the arrogance or the desperation it would take to stand up in 1989 when the Cold War still defined the world, when secrecy was survival, and declare, "I have touched technology from another civilization." Was he lying, delusional, or was he brushing up against a truth so vast that the only way to bury it was to erase him piece by piece, his school records, his credibility, his reputation, until he was little more than a ghost in the desert wind? Tonight, we are going to step into that silence with him. We are going to peel back the layers of secrecy, the walls of denial, the strange, consistent details that skeptics cannot quite explain away. We're going to ask the question that keeps men awake at 3 in the morning, staring at ceilings, dreading the silence outside their windows. If Bob Lazar was telling the truth, what else are they hiding? Settle into the stillness around you, the room, the air, the weight of the night. Because once we begin this journey, there's no going back. The desert doesn't give up its secrets easily, and the story we're about to unfold will not leave you comfortable. It will leave you wondering whether the stars above your house tonight are being bent silently by machines that should not exist. Chapter 1. The Silence Beneath the Stars. The desert has a way of swallowing truth, not by accident, not by negligence, but with the deliberate patience of an ancient predator. Out in Nevada, when the sun falls behind the jagged mountains and the temperature plunges like a stone into black water, the sky blossoms with more stars than the mind can hold. It is there, in that cathedral of silence, that Bob Lazar's story finds its echo, a story not only about machines and propulsion, but about the strange way secrets warp reality itself. Think back to the year 1989, when he first came forward. The internet was a whisper on the horizon. Cell phones were bulky bricks carried only by the wealthy, and the very idea of exposing government secrets to the public required courage that bordered on madness. And yet Lazar stepped into that void, telling a tale so outrageous, so blasphemous against the altar of established science, that it should have been dismissed instantly. And yet it wasn't. Why? Because in his words there was detail, texture, the kind of specificity that only someone who has seen with his own eyes can muster. Lazar said he worked at S4, a facility south of Area 51, hidden among barren hills where radar sweeps the ground and every stone is watched by satellites. He claimed he wasn't shown everything. No one was, but that his task was narrow, precise: study the propulsion system of a craft not made by human hands. And here lies the first fracture in the wall of denial. He described biometric hand scanners that identified employees by the length of their bones, technology so absurd at the time that skeptics roared with laughter. And yet decades later, photographs emerged showing those exact devices, confirming they weren't fiction but classified fact. He spoke of element 115, an isotope unknown to the periodic table, which he said was the fuel that allowed those craft to bend gravity like clay. At the time, no scientist had produced it, but in 2003, laboratories finally did, though unstable, decaying in milliseconds. Lazar insisted the version he saw was stable, forged in stellar furnaces light years away, the kind of isotope we cannot manufacture on Earth, but that might exist in the heart of distant suns. Was that a lucky guess or foreknowledge? Each year that passes, his story grows heavier, not lighter, because reality keeps catching up with his whispers. And there was more briefings that he claims outlined not just machines but history, records that spoke of extraterrestrial contact, beings from the Zeta Reticuli star system, 39 light-years away. Scientists scoffed, called it nonsense, yet astronomers now recognize Zeta Reticuli as a binary star system, old and stable enough to nurture habitable planets. Suddenly the laughter doesn't land so easily. Imagine if true that our government wasn't just reverse engineering alien craft, but building a library of encounters, a history we're not allowed to read. What chills the bone isn't the idea of aliens, it's the thought that someone already has the manual tucked in a filing cabinet under Groom Lake, while the rest of us stare upward in ignorance. The question that drifts like smoke is not whether Bob Lazar lied. Liars embellish. They grow their stories with each retelling. But Lazar has remained stubbornly consistent, repeating the same details with the same flat tone for over 3 decades. No expansions, no corrections, just the same strange truth, preserved like an insect in amber. And that is what unsettles even hardened skeptics, because maybe, just maybe, he's not inventing. Maybe he's describing the desert as it truly is, not empty, not barren, but a vault of impossible machines and erased histories. So tonight, as you feel the stillness around you, let yourself consider the possibility that out there, in the desert winds, hangar doors slide open to reveal ships that don't belong to Earth, and men like Lazar once stood inside them, trembling, staring at the future disguised as a secret. Chapter 2. The Crafts That Defy Our Imagination. When Lazar first saw the craft, he didn't describe fear, he described awe. The awe of standing before something so alien that it stripped the air from his lungs. It wasn't covered in wires or rivets. There were no seams, no welds, no panels. It was smooth, seamless, like it had been grown rather than built. Inside, the ceilings were short, the chairs small, as though designed not for human beings, but for something smaller, lighter, with proportions we cannot mimic. He nicknamed one ship the sport model, because in its strange way it seemed compact, aerodynamic, though aerodynamic is the wrong word. These crafts didn't move through air in the way jets do. They moved through space-time itself, ignoring drag, inertia, resistance. They didn't fly. They fell forward into bent reality. At the heart of it all was the reactor, a sphere no larger than a basketball, humming faintly, powered by stable element 115. Lazar explained it with the resignation of a man trying to describe a cathedral to ants. It generated a gravity wave, a distortion of the fabric of space. Instead of burning fuel to create thrust, it simply warped the path ahead and allowed the craft to fall into that pocket. No heat signature, no sound, no exhaust, just the eerie silence of reality bending. Think about that for a moment. A machine smaller than a household appliance, able to do what our entire civilization has never achieved. Control gravity. We're not talking about faster airplanes. We're talking about rewriting physics. In 2015, scientists detected gravitational waves for the first time, confirming Einstein's century-old prediction. But Bob Lazar had been describing machines that could use gravitational waves as engines nearly 30 years earlier. Coincidence? Or testimony that arrived before its time? He claimed the flights were terrifying to watch. The crafts didn't move like planes. They shifted, darted, hovered, stopped instantly, as though inertia didn't exist. Pilots would be crushed to paste if humans tried the same maneuvers, which leads to the haunting question, who or what pilots them? Lazar suggested that inside the reactor's field, physics itself bends, time slows, mass changes, maybe inertia disappears entirely. Maybe these machines aren't piloted in the way we think at all. Imagine a cockpit not of switches and levers, but of thought itself, where the craft bends reality in response to intention, not buttons. That's not flying, that's commanding reality. But here's the darker layer, secrecy. Why hide such power? If it exists, it could solve every energy crisis, revolutionize medicine, allow humanity to travel to Mars before breakfast. Yet Lazar said secrecy wasn't about fear of panic or misuse. It was about control. Whoever controls gravity controls the future. Imagine wars fought not with bombs but with instantaneous presence. Imagine governments watching from above with ships that can appear and vanish anywhere, anytime. The stakes aren't about disclosure, they're about domination. And Lazar, compartmentalized in his narrow assignment, realized he was part of something so immense that even his small piece of knowledge could get him killed. He spoke of colleagues who asked too many questions and were removed, not fired, removed. That's how delicate the secret was. And yet he couldn't resist telling the truth, because the sight of those craft was too overwhelming to bury in silence. Watching them hover above the Nevada desert, glowing faintly in the night sky, was like watching gods sketch their names across the stars. And the question that will not die, the one that keeps you awake even now, is simple. If Bob Lazar told the truth, then somewhere beneath the desert sands sits a fleet of machines that should not exist. Machines that hum with the power of collapsed stars. Machines that prove humanity is not alone. Machines that wait, patient and eternal, while we scramble on the surface, blind, convinced we are masters of the earth. But in reality, the desert knows who the masters truly are. Chapter 3. Desert Nights of Fire. The desert at night is not silence, it is pressure. It presses down on your skin, it crawls in your ears, it makes the crunch of every bootstep sound like thunder against the black sand. Bob Lazar knew that weight, because in 1989, when he first decided to pull friends into his secret world, he wasn't just telling them stories in a living room. He was turning them into witnesses. He led them out to the barren ridges near Groom Lake, not far from Cess 4, carrying nothing but shaky camcorders, binoculars bought at local shops, and the naive belief that truth, once seen, would be undeniable. Imagine it, ordinary people, wives, co-worker, curious friends, clutching thermoses of coffee and trying to laugh away the nerves as they waited under the bright burn of 1,000 stars. No phones, no internet, just the desert stretching for miles, black and infinite, and the pulse of adrenaline that only comes from expecting the impossible. And then it happened. A light rose from behind the mountains. Not a star, not a jet, not a flare, but a pearl of pure brilliance that seemed to shift against the horizon, as if the sky itself were fluid. Lazar's voice, calm but edged with reverence, whispered, "That's it." And before their eyes, the light moved. No roar of afterburners, no chop of rotors. It hovered still, precise, unnatural, before darting sideways in a burst so instantaneous the human brain could barely process it. One moment it was here, the next it was a streak across the horizon, then still again, as if it had skipped frames in reality itself. Witnesses gasped, cursed, laughed nervously, because their minds had no box to put this in. One woman reportedly wept quietly, not out of fear, but from the sheer enormity of it, the realization that everything she thought she knew about the world had just cracked apart. Lazar himself didn't laugh. His silence was heavier, almost mournful, because he knew what this meant. The secret wasn't theoretical. It wasn't an engineer's half-remembered tale. It was real, physical, burning itself into the retinas of ordinary people. And with reality comes risk. Every trip back into the desert grew darker. They began to notice headlights sweeping across the valleys, trucks rolling silently in the distance, men with flashlights and radios. Once their cameras were seized. Another time, they were detained, their names scribbled down on clipboards, their warnings cold and blunt. Stop coming back, or there will be consequences. The message was simple. Curiosity is not just dangerous, it is treasonous when it points toward S4. And yet what they captured, grainy VHS footage of lights dancing in impossible ways, still survives. Skeptics call it laughable, poor quality, easy to fake. But pause a moment. Compare that shaky footage to the Pentagon's 2004 Tic Tac encounters, where Navy pilots chased craft that moved with the same sharp impossibilities. Instantaneous acceleration, no wings, no exhaust, no sonic boom. The behavior matches across decades. So what's more likely? That Lazar and his friends just happened to fake footage that perfectly predicted military encounters years later, or that he was simply right all along and the desert was showing its hand? What Lazar confessed later was perhaps the most unsettling detail. When he watched those lights, he didn't just feel awe, he felt dread, because the craft didn't move like machines. They moved like hunters, fluid, silent, precise, not bumbling prototypes, not clumsy experiments, but predatory in their perfection. He said it felt less like watching a test and more like being observed in return, as if the intelligence inside was demonstrating control, reminding the human witnesses who the true masters of the sky were. And maybe that was the point. Maybe secrecy wasn't about hiding from us. It was about keeping us small, teaching us through intimidation that the truth was too heavy for ordinary people. Those desert nights linger like scars in the timeline of UFO history. For Lazar, they marked the point of no return. Once you've seen a machine bend the laws of physics in front of you, silence is impossible. But silence is exactly what the desert enforces. It swallows sound, swallows evidence, swallows people who ask the wrong questions. And when Lazar looked back at those nights, he realized something terrifying. It wasn't just the lights in the sky that hunted him. It was the silence itself. Chapter 4. Walls of Erasure. When Bob Lazar went public, it wasn't because he wanted fame. Fame, after all, would bring ridicule, scrutiny, destruction. It was survival. He believed silence would erase him, as surely as the desert erases footprints by morning. And so, With journalist George Knapp, he stepped onto the airwaves and told the world, the government is hiding alien technology at S4. It was a bomb dropped into the cultural bloodstream. For a brief moment, the world leaned in, but then came the counterstrike, not against the claims, but against Lazar himself. The first attack was surgical, his education. Lazar had said he studied physics at MIT, electronics at Caltech, yet no records surfaced, no transcripts, no yearbook photos, no professors who remembered him. To skeptics, this was proof. Case closed. He was a fraud. But then, Los Alamos National Laboratory records appeared, showing Lazar listed as a staff member in their phone directory. A local newspaper article featured him standing proudly beside a particle accelerator. How does a fraud end up working at one of the most tightly controlled labs in America? Skeptics said he was a low-level technician, not a scientist. Lazar countered that his records had been deliberately erased, purged to destroy his credibility. And here is the paradox, which is scarier, that Lazar fabricated a past, or that the government has the power to erase a man's very existence, striking his education and employment from history with the cold efficiency of a delete key. Then came the scandals. In 1990, Lazar was arrested for involvement in a prostitution ring. The charge had nothing to do with UFOs, yet it was amplified endlessly, splashed across headlines until his name became synonymous with unreliability. Was it coincidence? Or was it weaponized humiliation, a way to ensure that whenever Lazar spoke of reactors and gravity waves, the public would only remember the scandal? History is full of such tactics. Smear the messenger, and the message dies on its own. And yet, cracks kept forming in the wall of denial. The hand-bone scanner Lazar described mocked for years was later proven real, when photos surfaced showing the exact device in use at secure facilities. The element 115 he spoke of, dismissed as fantasy, was synthesized in a Russian lab in 2003, decades after he first named it. Yes, the version on Earth was unstable, but the fact remains, it exists. Each revelation tilted the scale slightly away from fantasy, towards something harder, stranger. Skeptics still clung to disbelief, but disbelief itself began to require more and more effort. Through all of it, Lazar never profited. He didn't write best-selling books. He didn't build a UFO empire. He retreated, opening a small company, United Nuclear, selling chemicals and lab equipment. In interviews, he seemed tired, reluctant, almost regretful. It wasn't worth it, he admitted more than once. And yet, through ridicule, through scandal, through threats, he never once recanted. That stubborn consistency is what makes his story terrifying. Because if he is lying, he has endured 35 years of harassment for nothing. And if he is telling the truth, then humanity is living in a world where alien machines hum quietly beneath the Nevada desert, while the rest of us stumble forward on fossil fuels and denial. The walls around Lazar's life are not built of concrete, they are built of erasure. Records vanish, reputations collapse, truth becomes indistinguishable from fiction, and in that erasure lies the most haunting possibility of all, that the desert doesn't just hide secrets, it devours them. Chapter 5. The Physics of the Impossible. When Bob Lazar described the propulsion system he worked on, he wasn't just inventing science fiction. He was pointing at cracks in our understanding of the universe, cracks that decades later, physics itself would begin to confirm. He spoke of a compact reactor, no larger than a basketball, fueled by a stable isotope of element 115. This reactor didn't burn fuel or spin turbines. It bent gravity. It generated a distortion in space-time, creating a localized wave that the craft could fall into. To an untrained ear, that sounds like fantasy. But pause for a moment. Einstein himself proved that mass bends space-time. Gravity isn't a force in the classical sense. It's the curve of reality itself. And in 2015, long after Lazar's testimony, scientists at LIGO announced the first detection of gravitational waves, ripples in space-time caused by colliding black holes. Suddenly, Lazar's description of manipulating gravity didn't sound like pseudoscience. It sounded like applied relativity, centuries ahead of our technology. Think of the implications. If you can control gravity, you don't just control movement, you control time. Inside the bubble of the craft's gravitational field, Lazar said, time itself behaved differently. The crew would experience events at a pace not matching outside observers. This isn't imagination, it's relativity in action. GPS satellites already require time corrections because orbiting Earth warps their clocks compared to ours. Now stretch that effect with a machine that can bend space-time at will. The pilot of such a craft isn't just traveling faster, he's stepping into a different timeline. Imagine leaving Earth, skipping across space, and returning home to find decades passed in hours. This isn't just propulsion, it's chronology under command. But Lazar's description contained another detail that unsettled scientists. The system emitted no heat, no radiation, no moving parts. Our entire civilization depends on the noisy violence of combustion, explosions in engines, fission in reactors, friction in turbines. We burn, we smash, we explode. The machine Lazar saw did none of that. It hummed softly, silent as stone, yet it bent the laws of nature. If such technology exists, then every oil refinery, every nuclear plant, every coal mine is already obsolete. Wars over energy, over resources, over territory would be meaningless. And yet humanity still claws at the ground for fuel, still floods the atmosphere with carbon, still wages battles for oil fields. Why? Because secrecy is not about protection, it's about power. Whoever holds gravity itself in their grip doesn't just lead the world, they own it, and here lies the paradox that keeps skeptics awake at night. If Lazar is lying, he is the most consistent liar in modern history, describing in perfect detail a technology that just happens to mirror scientific breakthroughs decades after the fact. But if he is telling the truth, then our species is a child building fires from sticks, while in the desert, under mountains, hums the technology of gods, a technology we are forbidden to touch, forbidden even to know. Imagine standing in front of that reactor, the soft hum vibrating in your chest, knowing that every textbook you've ever read, every scientific law you've memorized, is now inadequate. That's the weight Lazar carried. That's the weight that drove him to speak, even knowing he'd be destroyed for it. Because once you've seen a machine bend reality, silence becomes impossible. And now, as the night deepens around you, let the story fade into stillness. Bob Lazar's testimony remains suspended between belief and denial, like a light flickering in the desert sky. Some call him a liar, a fraud, a fantasist. Others see him as a reluctant prophet, a man who stumbled against the edges of secrets too vast for human civilization. The truth? It may never be confirmed in our lifetimes. Records can vanish, reputations can be erased. But memory, the memory of one man describing machines that defy physics, still lingers like a hum in the background of our collective awareness. Perhaps tonight, as you drift into sleep, you'll hear that hum too. Not as fear, not as paranoia, but as wonder, the quiet suggestion that the universe is far stranger than the narrow walls we build around it. Somewhere beyond the fences of Groom Lake, beyond the locked hangars and the desert silence, machines may still be waiting, machines that bend stars, fold time, and whisper of civilizations older than Earth itself. Whether or not Lazar told the truth, the idea remains: we are not alone, so let your breathing slow, your thoughts soften. The story has carried you through deserts, through secrecy, through impossible physics. Now it hands you back to the night. Sleep gently, with the mystery still glowing faintly in your dreams, like a saucer gliding silently across the Nevada sky.